hands on his feet. He's got a nose like a donut. He's got a tendency to overeat. He don't use tools or weapons. He don't eat meat. He likes to stick to the bushes, tends to avoid the street. But he rides my Eldorado, baby, when he comes to town. You know he's out there somewhere, trying to track you down. Look up in the sky, mama, that's the one, yeah. See the mighty profile, block the noonday sun. He comes from the heart of darkness, 1,000 miles from here. And that's a land where they understand what a woman might like.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Richard Walrath, and this is The Hidden Minority. What is the hidden minority? Well, on this program we're going to be talking about a segment of the population which many, many years ago were hidden away in institutions, in some cases in their own homes, not very much thought of as a normal part of society. But that's changed. We're talking about the physically handicapped. Not just physically, but in other ways also, disabled people. And tonight we will talk about a new program here in Santa Barbara called Access Theater, which has provided a new outlet for disabled people to express themselves. It's called live theater, accessible theater. And our guest this evening is the director of the Santa Barbara Access Theater, Mr. Rod Latham. Rod, good evening. Welcome to our first show.
Thank you, Rick. Good to be here.
Rod, tell us a little bit about accessible theater and how long it's been going on and how long, and what you have done with it and how you got involved in doing something of this magnitude.
Well, Access Theater, it formerly was known as Santa Barbara Theater of the Handicapped. We're still known by that name because we just changed our name in August. Started about 4 years ago. I got a job with the City Recreation Department and did a show called Circus of Life, which featured 60 developmentally disabled, physically disabled, and a couple non-disabled people in the cast. And we did the show at the Libero as an experiment to see how it would come about, see if it would work or not. And fortunately, the show worked. It was a real challenge for everybody involved, and we broke a lot of new turf in trying to do that. The outcome of that initial process of working with disabled people in a show in a community theater like the Libero was that the theater was started, and that was basically the beginnings of Santa Barbara Theater of the Handicapped. That job ended about 5 months later, and I was out of a job but still wanted to keep working. I knew that there was a need because through my contact with disabled people in Santa Barbara area and the county, with that first show, I knew that there was plenty of people out there that wanted to be involved in some kind of a creative arts program where they could get some stage experience, some drama experience, and really learn to uncover a part of themselves that really had not ever been given a chance to blossom through the arts and through performing. So that was the beginning of Santa Barbara Theater of the Handicapped, and that was about 4.5 years ago, and since then we are 7 original shows in the can and going on and expanding and growing all the time.
You've done a lot of different types of things with your productions as far as the topics you've covered, the types of scripts you've done, and the types of handicaps you've involved in those productions. Why don't you tell us about a few of those different productions you've done in the past?
I think that's one of the things that makes our program unique, one of the many, because there are very few programs in the country that do what we're doing. Instead of trying to follow an exact format of doing all dramas or all musicals. We've experimented, and we've had the flexibility to play with reviews, musical reviews that have been light and basically not trying to get across any heavy message. We did Take a Card, Any Card, which probably was our most heavy show in that it dealt directly with issues and stereotypes and problems that disabled people in our society today face, and how those people face them, what they do to get around some of the pitfalls and obstacles that do exist. It was done still with kind of a tongue-in-cheek, light-hearted comedy in mind, but on the other hand, there were some pretty heavy moments in it where things were hit kind of head-on. Footlight Fantasy came right after Take a Card, Any Card, and we really wanted to get away from the heaviness, because we also have to be careful of how we present ourselves to the public. We don't want to reverse the trend of making disabilities a normal part of our society, or to disabled people, because in the past, as you mentioned earlier, people tend to be closeted away. So we wanted to keep a positive image, something that the community would be open to and not feel like, oh God, I don't know if I really want to go see that show because there's handicapped people in it and they talk about the problems. I don't want to deal with that. We wanted to be careful not to do that too much. So Footlight, the show after Take a Card, was a step in the opposite direction to show that no matter whether a person has a handicap or not, they can get out on stage and they can sing, they can dance, they can act. And it provided a musical, a kind of a magical musical format where people could live out their fantasies on stage in an abandoned theater. And that was a lot of fun. We had a lot of fun with that because we were able to tap into individual talents and strengths that everyone had in the cast.
One of the things that you did with Take a Card, Any Card, which to me was one of the my most favorite experiences as far as seeing accessible theater, was getting involved after the show with coming on stage and just having a rap session with the audience about the show itself and about their attitude coming in, their attitude now that the show was over.
Right.
What were some of the things that you gathered from that? What were some of the different the comments that you got about seeing handicapped people and non-handicapped people on the stage at the same time in a show?
It was very interesting because that was the first show that we had opened up, you know, after the show and come out. We had everybody introduce themselves. We had 5 people who happened to be in wheelchairs in that cast, and we found that as people introduced themselves, like Linda Egar was a transcribed Persian literature into English and vice versa, and Claire was a retired choral director, and a number of other people who had some incredible professions. And the audience, you could hear the audience kind of going, oh wow, oh, they do that? And we were just sitting there going, we were right. These people really didn't think that just because these people were in wheelchairs or had disabilities that they were, you know, productive people in our society. So the first reaction was on not everybody's part, but on a lot of people's part, was amazement that these people were so accomplished. When we then opened it up to questions, since the audience knew really who these people were outside of their characters on stage, at first it was hard to get questions out of people, and then as people loosened up and started asking things, it almost turned into a testimony type of a situation where people came up. One man got up and said, I want to come up and shake all of your hands. And so we said, great, come on up and shake our hand. You know, and it was, the cast didn't really know how to take that, but it was a real honor. It was a very great compliment. This guy said, I got to come up and shake your hands. And another woman stood up and said, you know, I'm never going to feel uncomfortable around a person with a handicap again, because all of my preconceptions, all of my stereotyped images of handicapped people were destroyed tonight by seeing what happened on this stage. And obviously that was quite a spine tingler for me, not to mention for the cast, to really have this kind of a direct conversation and see how, you know, an hour and a half in the theater could change somebody's outlook on people and on life in general. And that happens a lot. We have taken that format of question and answers and used it since then. The show we're touring right now, Finger Talk, is a sign language review with deaf and hearing actors. And after each show, we're touring to a lot of schools, and kids have a lot of questions about, like, what's it like to be deaf? Or what's it like, in another case, to be in a wheelchair? Or how do you communicate? How do you get to school? How do you do this? How do you do that? And we found that it's a real good time to answer a lot of those questions. We've even turned it into somewhat of a fun situation, because young kids often confuse the word deaf and death. And when they ask who are the deaf people or the deaf people in the cast, we've made up a little routine where all the deaf people die and they fall on the floor. To show that there really is a difference between being deaf and being dead.
You mentioned Finger Talk. Finger Talk is totally a sign language review by Access Theater, as was their previous production called Signing Off, which was also very successful here in Santa Barbara. We're about to see a short tape. There are no words with it, obviously, but I'm sure what you'll see will tell all. And it's just a short little example of what Finger Talk is all about. So let's go right to that right now.
What is this? Your friend, the blob. Is it alive? So what do you do with it?
Finger talking, look a while.
No.
Okay, as opposed to what I said, there were some words in there, but mostly I think you got the message just from some of the things that were acted out there in the sign language. Rod, tell us a little bit about some of the people who were involved in that tape.
Well, some of the people that you just saw, Victor Torres, who was in the red red pants, purple shirt. Victor is deaf, and he's been in 2 of our shows. He, among with some of the other people, Lori Hennessy, Solomon Smanioto, was a little guy, all live here in town. And Victor has had some theater training and had done some shows at Riverside School of the Deaf when he was younger in school. Lori Hennessy had no theater experience, nor had Solomon, but they all joined us last year in 1981 for Signing Off, and we toured that show for about a month and a half, and they came back this year to do the show again with us.
Rod, you have a book that you have just put out, and I don't know if we can show it here on the camera, but
Sure. Well, I'll hold it up.
it's called Open Auditions, and it's by Rod Latham, and also Martin Kimmeldorf helped
Right.
you out, who was the man who wrote Take a Card, Any Card.
Right.
Tell us a little bit about what is in that book and what your inspiration to writing this book was.
Well, this for us with Access Theater is a real triumph, because we've been waiting about 2 years to get this off the press, and it just came off the press yesterday, so I'm really glad I could bring it today. It is a handbook, a manual on basically how to put together an accessible theater. We have a whole section full of scripts. In fact, Take a Card is in there, the complete script, as is Through Our Eyes, our second show. Another show by Martin called The Sin Eaters, which we haven't produced here yet, but it's a neat drama. And a couple other scripts from people in other parts of the country, as well as essays from people all across the country and their experience in working in theater in all different levels. We've been doing workshops for the past 3 years at universities and rec centers and for other theaters in the country, and they always ask, for how do you get started, where do you get your funding from, and things like that. So we finally put it all together in a book, Open Auditions, and it's going to be distributed through Ednix Press in Portland, Oregon, and we're real excited about it.
Where does a lot of the funding to continue this program come from, Rod?
Well, right now, funding isn't coming from anywhere. Even though we're 4 years old, funding has been getting increasingly more difficult to come by. We are a nonprofit organization under the nonprofit umbrella of the Independent Living Resource Center here in Santa Barbara. And our funding comes from private donations, from grants, foundation grants, state grants. Federal grants don't look real promising right now for us because the cutbacks have been incredible. Ticket sales, program ads when we go out into the community to sell ads in our programs for the shows, and patrons. And that's basically where all of our funding comes from. We have a budget, an annual budget of about $65,000, and we're constantly having to raise funds. And we found it's really hard to reach the private sector of the community because you're looking basically at the full-time staff of the theater. We have other people who work with us, but mainly on an artistic level as opposed to fundraising. So my time is broken up between directing and writing and fundraising, and it's very difficult. It's very difficult.
You have many very outstanding people who have worked behind the scenes in putting a lot of these productions together. Maybe you want to give some of them a plug.
Sure do. In fact, without the staff that we have, the theater really would not exist. I started single-handedly with the first two shows, but I knew after that there was no way I was going to be able to continue on without a lot of help. And since 1979, we have gained a composer, Mark Henderson, who has written most of the music we've used in our shows, an incredible talent who's going to go places we know. Susan Warren, our art director, and Fran Bucher, our interpreter. Peter Robertson is our sign language consultant, and Peter McCorkle is our choreographer. And the list goes on and on as far as volunteers and people who really make things happen. Connie Samovitz is our lyricist. Now I'm trying to remember everybody's name so I don't leave anybody out. But everybody has been an incredible help to make all these productions work. And basically we're looking at volunteer time and volunteer help. We try to pay our staff as much as we can and whenever we can, but it's not always possible with the economy the way it is.
Rod, let's go back to your very first production when you first put Access Theater together, and you stepped on that stage to direct for the first time disabled and non-disabled people on the same stage. What was it like? What types of adaptations did you have to make in order to create a positive atmosphere? Were there a lot of mental adjustments that had to be made, attitudes that had to be broken down by either the disabled or the non-disabled actors? Exactly what was the experience like for you that first time out?
Well, the rehearsal process was one thing. When we moved into the libero, it was another. It was a lot of hours, and we had, as I mentioned earlier, we had 65 people in the first show. And whether the cast is made up of handicapped people or not, that's a lot of bodies and a lot of people to direct and to put on the stage to make a show happen successfully. And probably the main thing for myself, my first show, I had to make a lot of mental adjustments in that the theater work I had done before that in college and in past years was usually pretty quickly put together. The direction was good, but usually minimal, and everything had to be turned around kind of the opposite way in that we needed more time. We spent about 3 months rehearsing and long hours of repetition. A lot of the people that were in the first show are developmentally disabled, and that takes a lot of repetition. We had a few people in wheelchairs. That meant that our sets had to be unobtrusive as far as getting around on stage and backstage. Everybody really had to learn how to work together. As I said before, with a cast that big, you got to have a tight family or it's not going to work. Something's going to fall apart somewhere. We also had a lot of emotional and just kind of mental barriers to break, in that for many of the people it was the first time they'd ever been on any stage, and to go directly to the libero stage was a real mind blower. In fact, like about 8 minutes before we opened, 3 of them ran out the back door, and I was down chasing them down State Street to Piccadilly Square before I found them and got them back. They did go on. 2 of the 3 of them went on. The other one just couldn't make it. But I mean, we deal with the same things everybody does in theater. There are last-minute jitters and nerves, stage fright. In fact, in Stage Struck, our last show, we even played off of a whole scene about stage fright with Steve, because when he auditioned, he said, you know, the only thing I'm worried about is I'm afraid I'm going to get out there and freak out and just not know what to do, forget my lines. And that's common. Everybody goes through that. I think the important part, though, is that the things I take for granted now in directing are that there are adaptations to be made. There are script adaptations for everybody's needs, whether a person is going to sign their lines in sign language and use a hearing person to voice their lines. The things as far as making room for interpreters to shadow interpret, making your sets accessible so that someone in a wheelchair can get on them and off them and around them on and off stage. Making sure that the people that are working with you to put together a whole production are ready and open to working with someone with a disability or a group of people with disabilities, and not letting attitudes get in the way, because they really can get in the way. The crew at the Libero needs to be open to that. Everybody does, and once you are open to that, you need to get past it and just do a show. We're here to do good theater, and that's our primary goal, is to do quality theater. And the fact that we have a handicapped person or many handicapped people in the show is secondary. So we're out to do quality theater, and so my direction is based around making a good production, pulling out everything I can artistically from an individual and from a group. And I think the one thing that has kept us alive is that, and I'm proud to say that the thing that audience people come back saying is that there is a magic on stage at our shows. We're community theater, so we're not the pros on Broadway or in LA, but there is a magic that happens, a connection between the audience and the performers on stage, and the reactions that we've had over the past 4 years have been incredible. And that's what it's all about, to make somebody walk away from the theater and go, wow, and have them talk about it for days and weeks and months. And that's the ultimate reward for me. I'm
interested, were there a lot of those same realizations, like, I didn't know they could do that, among a lot of the able-bodied cast members?
Oh, yeah.
during rehearsals and things?
The exchange, a lot of people think, oh, what a great program for handicapped people. But I say what a great program for non-handicapped people or temporarily able-bodied people, because there's as much learning on their part as there is on the disabled people part. They come away usually with a totally different attitude, and we usually have really tight, close-knit families by the time we finish a show. So there's a lot of education, silent education that goes on. A lot of the people in our cast that aren't disabled have never worked with disabled people before, and they, it's like they don't even see the wheelchairs anymore, and they learn sign language, and it's a real exciting part of the program, is the integration and the combination of everybody working together.
It's obvious from what you're saying, Rod, that not only the audiences that you've played to, but the cast members and I'm sure yourself have had quite a number done on yourselves as far as an impact by these productions.
Yeah, keeps you going for sure.
Recently, you did a workshop together with the National Theater of the Deaf. The National Theater of the Deaf came here for their 29th tour of the United States. Tell us a little bit about that. The tape we showed was from Garvin Theater at City College, right, where that workshop took place. What were some of the things that happened there, and some of your experiences, some of the things you learned?
Well, we performed Finger Talk for NTD as well as an audience of sign language students and deaf people and hearing people, and invited members from NTD to come and see the show. I had worked with them about a year ago at their summer school in Waterford, Connecticut at the Eugene O'Neill Theater Center, and learned an awful lot from them. In fact, it was my working with them that prompted signing off our signing review last year. So we were anxious to have them see Finger Talk and get their input and all, and they enjoyed the show very much. Some of the dialogue that we had after the show centered around methods of stage interpreting and stage signing. I'm not going to get into all that now because it's a real long, detailed process, but basically we use American Sign Language, pure American Sign Language in our shows, and we talked a lot about how that was happening, a little bit about the movement in the show and the choreography, and had a real good time, a real good exchange with them.
Great. In the few minutes we have left, I want to get into, again, the funding a little bit and talk about the need for for keeping a program like this alive. What, again, specifically, what are some of the funding sources that you had in the past, and what seems to be the status of that right now, and how much more getting out in the community are you going to do to try to solicit more funds to keep the program going?
Yeah, well, this is a good example of one way we're going to try to get out into the community farther, because I'm sure that some people are going to watch this and have never even heard of us, or wondered where we get our funding, and now they're going to know that we need funding badly. In the past, we've had state grants from the Arts Council and from the Developmental Services. The Developmental Services grant was a one-time grant. The Arts Council grants are wonderful, but they're not big in amount. So the majority of the funding we have to raise on a local level through donations and foundations and ticket sales. As far as the future goes, we're working as hard as we can to find new sources of funding, research and find people who are needing tax write-offs. We're a tax-deductible organization, and it's basically got to come from the community. So I hope it will, because we really want to keep going.
For the community to know more about Access Theater, Rod, we're going to put your name and phone number at the bottom of the screen, and why don't you just run it by our audience and let them know how they can find out more about Access Theater and how they can help.
Well, our address is 2428 Chapala Street, and the number is on the screen, 682-8184, and the zip code is 93105. And that's where we can be reached day or night. I have an answering machine, so if you miss me, leave a message. But anyone who's interested in helping, whether it be for funding or for trying out for a show or anything, volunteering for sets, costume crew, we need help in all areas. So they should give me a call anytime. I'd love to hear from them.
Rod, we started this series off with a bang, I think. It was very, very good having you here. It was a pleasure, and hopefully Access Theater will continue to go strong, and I hope a lot of people get out there to see it, because it is really quite an experience, as I can tell you from personal experience myself, a couple of the productions I've seen. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Rick. I hope the series goes well.
Rod Latham, the director of the Santa Barbara Access Theater, talking about how to adapt theater, live theater for the handicapped, and what has been done here in Santa Barbara to do that. I want to give you a couple of final notes before we go off, and one is that The Hidden Minority can also be heard on KCSB Radio. That's on the FM dial, 91.9, from 5 to 5:30 every Wednesday evening. Also, if you have any comments about the program, any issues you'd like to see covered on the program, any other topics, whatever, anything that you are concerned about that you'd like to find out about more and have done on this program, just write me or call me at the Santa Barbara County Easter Seal Society, and we will have that phone number and address on the screen at the end of the program. For now, I'm Richard Walrath for The Hidden Minority. Good night.
Look a while, the ABCs have never had so much style. With finger walking, flipping fast, with finger talking, it's such a blast. Shoot, 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 do 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 wah. Shoot, 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 do 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 wah. The finger talking, real guide. From heart to hands, baby, watch them glide. The finger walking now, watch my eyes. They're gonna tell you what words can disguise. But shoot, shoot, shoot.